Welcome back to Game of Theories, where I introduce theories of management, administration, and leadership. In this video, I'll introduce an influential concept in organizational theory, sensemaking. It is a concept introduced by Karl Weick, a social psychologist. Karl Weick has made significant contributions to the fields of organizational behavior, management, and social psychology. Sensemaking is not a full-fledged theory yet. If you want to learn what a theory is, check out my previous video on how to develop a theoretical framework. Sensemaking is better described as a conceptual lens to explain how individuals and groups make sense of complex and ambiguous situations. What is sensemaking? Change, failure, dissonance, confusion, and doubt are features of organizational life. At its core, sensemaking involves the creation of coherent and meaningful narratives that help organizations and their members understand and navigate the world around them. Here are some of the key fundamentals of sensemaking. First, sensemaking involves the creation of retrospective images and narratives. Retrospective means looking back at events and situations. Retrospective images and narratives mean that the mental images and narratives that organizational members create after an event or experience has occurred in order to explain and make sense of their experiences and actions. Have you and your team experienced any major organizational change, such as your team being consolidated with another team, the change of the ownership of your organization, and the change of the governing body of a school district? Recall what retrospective images and narratives were created by organizational members to make sense of that change and developed a shared understanding of what had happened and why. Did those retrospective images and narratives explain the cause and effect of the organizational change? Did those retrospective images and narratives explain how organizational members responded to the change as they navigate the complex and ambiguous situations? Second, sensemaking is a collective process. Sensemaking is not just an individual process, but also a collective process that is socially constructed. To make sense of complex, ambiguous situations in organizations, organizational members interact and communicate with one another. We can view organizations as sense-making systems that seek to make sense of their environment, which is created by routines, roles, tasks, structure, procedures, communication processes, history, and even its future. Third, sensemaking seeks to understand both the sources of stability and change. This is why sensemaking stands out in organizational theory. Most concepts and theories explain organizational change and reactions to change, but sensemaking focuses on situations and processes that don't make sense. Sensemaking is a key mechanism that organizations use to cope with ambiguity and uncertainty that don't make sense, such as the shifting market and regulations brought by COVID-19 pandemic. Applying sensemaking as a conceptual lens, we look at anomalies such as major organizational changes that triggers how people make sense of those events, created a shared understanding of the situation, and gain insight into its stability and the potential for growth. Once a collective shared meaning is established, it manifests itself as repeated routines, tools, methods, techniques, processes, and communication that sustain organizational stability. Some organizations navigate anomalies and emergency on a regular basis. Hospitals, firefighter departments, police departments, and startup companies need reliable routines as well as retrospective images and narratives to sustain stability. Once in place, they stabilize an organization. Fourth, sense-making involves the use of multiple cues to create mental models. Multiple cues are symbols, stories, vocabularies, rituals, norms, and values. Those cues are sources for the creation of a mental model, which refers to a cognitive framework or internal representation that is used and makes sense of organizational members' environment. We can think of mental models as mental maps that help us organize and interpret the vast amount of information and stimuli, identify patterns and relationships, and predict future outcomes. We build the mental models based on multiple cues, our past experiences, knowledge, cultural background, personal beliefs, values, and assumptions. And those mental models serve to create retrospective images and narratives and a shared understanding of the situation. Fifth, sense-making involves the use of plausibility tests. To test the plausibility of the mental models, we test our own mental models with others and via action, and then refine our understandings or abandoning them in favor of new ones that better explain a shifting reality. We revise or update our understanding of the situation as new information becomes available. Through the consistent sense-making efforts, a collective understanding and meaning arises. This is why I always caution my students who are leaders and who aspire to be leaders against a mindset of my perception is my reality. When we make this statement in front of others, we usually imply your perception doesn't matter to me. My perception is your reality. And how dare you not take my perception as it is? The essence of leadership is to influence and inspire people towards a shared goal. It is not about an individual leader's perception or mental model. Instead, it's about a collective shared meaning and understanding. A leader's mental model has to undergo plausibility tests, in which a leader's mental model is tested with others' mental models. It's refined or abandoned in favor of a better mental model that provides a more compelling explanation of a reality. When leaders dismiss a collective bottom-up understanding of what's going on in organizations, they impose a top-down command that mandates all organizational members to accept my perception is your reality. And this is an origin of many organizational problems. It is therefore essential for leaders, administrators, and managers to understand the collective process of sense-making in order to help their organizations thrive. The sense-making process is often misunderstood. There are some common misconceptions about sense-making. Here I introduce what sense-making is not. First, sense-making is not the same as perception or cognition. Although sense-making involves perception and cognition, it is a distinct process, involves creating meaning and understanding from information and experiences, and often involves social interaction and communication with others. Second, sense-making is not a purely rational process. It is influenced by both cognitive and affective matters. Cognitive factors include information and knowledge. Affective factors include emotions and feelings. Third, sense-making is not a purely individual process. Sense-making goes beyond a phenomenological approach that seeks to understand lived experiences as individuals. Of course, individuals play a critical role in the sense-making process. Sense-making is better understood as a bridging concept that connects individual perceived meaning to a shared meaning created by a collective mind through social interaction and communication with others. Fourth, sense-making is not a linear process with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Sense-making is an ongoing process instead of a one-time event. It is also an iterative process that often involves backtracking and revising earlier interpretations as new information becomes available. Sense-making is an ongoing, repeating process with each repetition builds on the results of the previous created retrospective images and narratives. This process is like our memory. Our memory is not a photocopy machine. Our memory is not simply recorded and stored in the brain like files on a computer hard drive. When we remember something, we don't simply retrieve an exact replica of the original experience. Instead, we reconstruct memory every time we retrieve a memory. When we retrieve a memory, fragmented information stored in different areas of the brain are pieced together. During this process, new information can be updated and integrated into existing memories. We actively reconstruct past experiences rather than the simple retrieval of an exact replica of the original event. This reconstruction of past experiences is influenced by a variety of factors, including our emotional state, the context in which the memory was formed, and the cognitive processes involved in encoding, storage, and retrieval. This is why leading questions, social influence, and other factors that can distort or manipulate our recollection of past experiences. We need to be cautious when we rely on memory as a source of information or evidence because memory is highly susceptible to distortion and manipulation, which can lead to inaccuracies and even false memories. In the sense-making process, given the integration of new information, some cues fade in importance, while others emerge into prominence. The selected cues are refined through feedback and amplification, which are represented by retrospective images and narratives. As Marcel Proust said, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Sense-making is an ever-changing process requiring the integration of incoming information with prior knowledge about the situation over multiple timescales. Fifth, sense-making does not always lead to a clear and shared understanding. Sometimes sense-making leads to multiple interpretations or even disagreements about the meaning of a situation. This is particularly true in complex, ambiguous situations. Fifth, sense-making does not always lead to a clear and shared understanding. Sometimes sense-making leads to multiple interpretations or even disagreements about the meaning of a situation. This is particularly true in complex, ambiguous situations. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, sense-making is not a full-fledged theory. There are still some issues that needs to be worked out. A major criticism of sense-making is a lack of theoretical clarity. The term sense-making is highly abstract. There is no single agreed definition of sense-making. The term is like a sponge. It refers generally to those processes by which people seek plausibly to understand ambiguous, equivocal, or confusing issues or events. Inconsistent meaning of sense-making makes it challenging for applications. The second criticism of sensemaking as a concept is that it does not provide a straightforward or clear-cut explanation. The sense-making process dances out of traditional illustration of flowcharts and diagrams that are composed of boxes and arrows, lists and categories. Also, it is difficult to test the concept of sense-making statistically because a quantitative approach oversimplifies complex organizational processes and fails to fully capture the nuances and complexities of organizational behavior. A good theory is parsimonious, meaning that it explains a phenomenon in a clear and concise manner. A good theory should be as simple as possible while still accounting for all of the available empirical evidence. The third criticism of sensemaking is its tendency to prioritize individual sensemaking over collective sensemaking and organizational norms and values. The emphasis on individual organizational members and their subjective interpretations may overlook broader structural and institutional factors that shape organizational behavior. If you are interested in learning more about sensemaking and its applications, here are some recommended readings. This is a recent article on sensemaking. It was published in Journal of Management in January 2023. Authors conducted a systematic review to explain the roles and functions of different linguistic elements in meaning construction and developed an integrative theoretical framework that provides a better explanation of how different linguistic processes shape the construction of meaning in sensemaking. In this video, I introduced the fundamentals, misconceptions, and criticism of sensemaking. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future episodes of Game of Theories. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.